Hi, in this video, I'm going to talk about how to use the ISM model and to derive the downward sloping aggregate demand curve. And we're going to study about the IS shock and the LM shocks. So in chapter 10, we derive the downward sloping aggregate demand curve as following. So we have a y-axis, the price level, and the x-axis, the output, and we have a downward sloping aggregate demand curve. And we use the quantity equation, and the quantity equation is MV equals PY. That's the quantity equation, or the quantity theory of the theory of the quantity. Then we can write down this way. So M over P equals 1 over V times Y. Then from there, you can capture the inverse relationship between the price and the output. When you assume that the central bank, they don't touch the money supply and the velocity is not changed over time. So then from there, you can capture the inverse relationship between the P and Y. So that being said, when the price goes up, the left-hand side goes down, right? In order to hold this equality, output has to be decreased. That's why we have a downward sloping aggregate demand curve. But this chapter, not only we derive this same aggregate downward sloping aggregate demand curve based on the ISM model, but we can talk about the much more detailed explanation for the interest rate and the other parts. So here, this is ISM model we covered in chapter 12. So the first equation is following the IS equation or the IS curve. This is downward sloping on the graph of the y-axis is the real interest rate R, and the x-axis is the income output Y or the real GDP. And this IS curve captures the goods market equilibrium. We derive it by using the Keynesian curves. And then the LM curve captures the goods market equilibrium. So the left-hand side is a money supply and the right-hand side is a money demand. Okay. And this one is upward sloping. LM curve is a upward sloping. When the government implement expansionary fiscal policy or the contractionary fiscal policy, that shift this IS curve. Okay, put it simply, expansionary fiscal policy shift this IS curve, shift to the right. On the other hand, the contractionary fiscal policy IS curve shift to the left. Okay, and the monetary policy is the same, expansionary monetary policy. So central bank put more money into the market. Then the LM curve shifts to the right, and contractionary monetary policy, then LM curve shifts to the left. So contractionary monetary policy is following. They reduce the money supply. How they reduce the money supply? Well, here is the central bank and here is the market. In order to reduce the money supply, they sell the bonds and get the dollars from the market. So that's a contractionary monetary policy. And you can derive them, you can draw the money market graph to explain this situation. But we're gonna see the details for some examples, some examples. All right, so here we have the ISM model. So fiscal policy, such as you adjust the government adjusts the government spending or the tax, that's a fiscal policy. And the monetary policy, basically the central bank adjusts the money supply. Okay. So fiscal policy, when government implement expansionary fiscal policy, such as raising government spending, then what happened? This IS curve shift to the right. Not only we get to know the direction of this IS curve, but also we can calculate how much we need to shift, because we cover this equation. Delta Y equals 1 over 1 minus MPC times delta G plus negative MPC over 1 minus MPC times delta T. So this 1 over 1 minus MPC, that's a government purchase multiplier. And this negative MPC over 1 minus MPC is a tax multiplier. Okay. So from there, we can calculate how much we need to shift. Okay, so as long as you know the MPC and you know how much the government spending is changed, then you can calculate how much we need to shift. Okay, so expansionary fiscal policy shift this IS curve to the right. As a result, what happened? Interest rate is increased and output is increased. Okay, before this chapter and before you use the ISM model, it was not that clear whether the interest rate is increased or decreased after the expansionary fiscal policy, but now it becomes clear. Because when you shift this IS curve, obviously interest rate goes up, output goes up. one of the reason or the evidence that we can see that interest rate will be increased when government implement expansion fiscal policy is that we can find it from the loan over funds market. So to remind you, loan over funds market, we have the y-axis, the real interest rate, and the x-axis, the quantity of the loan over funds, and we have a downward sloping demand of the loan over funds, and then the upward sloping supply of the loan over funds, right? When government implement expansionary fiscal policies, such as they lower the tax or delaying the government spending, then they face the budget deficit, right? Then they need to finance their deficit. How? They go to the loan over funds market and they borrow the money to finance their debt. So then what happened? This demand curve shift to the right. As a result, we face a higher interest rate. That's the one way to see that what happened to the interest rate when government implement expansion fiscal policy. Now, without having this loan over funds market graph, you can easily check whether the interest rate is decreased or increased when government implement the fiscal policy. So that being said, when the government implement the contraction fiscal policy, so they lower the government spending, then what happened? Output decreases, then and interest rate decreases too. And this is another one, the fiscal policy, a tax cut, same expansionary fiscal policy, but then the IS curve shift to the right, same thing. How much? This much. So that's the formula, delta y equals negative MPC over 1 minus MPC times delta t. So it's better to put the negative sign here, right? If you don't want to put the so take the absolute, then it's better to put the negative sign, right? So it's not that clear, so that's why here we have to have the negative sign. And then the monetary policy, well, the monetary policy shift this LM curve, and expansion monetary policy shift this LM curve to the right, and contraction monetary policy shift this LM curve to the left. Okay, shift to the right or the shift to the downward, basically they are the same. It depends on the slope, but they are the same. Shift to the right or the shift to the downward, they are the same. Okay, so as a result of the expansion monetary policy, interest rate is decreased and the output is increased. Again, you can recall the money market graph. So the y-axis, the real interest rate R, and the x-axis, the real money balances M over P. And we have a downward sloping demand curve of the money, and we have a vertical money supply curve, right? And then if the central bank implement expansion monetary policy, they put more money, they raise the money supply. So this is a M prime over P. Then what happened? Interest rate is decreased from the R1 to R2, okay? So they are consistent. So expansion monetary policy, lower the interest rate, and we can verify by having this ISM model or the money market graph, okay? So now let's talk about the interaction between the monetary policy and the fiscal policy. So we're gonna study the 3 different responses of the central bank when government increase their spending. So suppose the Congress increase the government spending, and there are 3 possible Fed responses. The first one is a hold M constant. That means that basically the central bank, they don't do anything. And then the second one is somehow the central bank, they want to keep the same interest rate. And then the last one is that they want to keep the same amount of the output, okay? So let's take a look one by one. So the first one, central bank, they don't do anything when the government implement expansion fiscal policy. So because the government implemented expansion fiscal policy, IS curve shift to the right. So as a result, interest rate is increased, output is increased. Done. That's the scenario that the central bank, they don't do anything. Now, the second one is, now they want to keep the same interest rate. So here, this is the interest rate they want to keep. So first, government implemented expansion fiscal policy. So IS curve shift to the right from here to there. And we're supposed to have a higher interest rate here. So higher interest rate, let's say that RT, temporary interest rate, and then higher output, YT. But in this response, central bank, they don't want to have a higher interest rate RT, right? So that means that they need to go to this interest rate. Then what they need to do, they just need to shift this LM curve to the right to go back to this interest rate, okay? So in the case of central bank, they need to implement expansion monetary policy, okay? And then the third one, this last one, Somehow, central bank, they want to keep this output. So first, there's a typo, the IS curve shift to the right. Then we're supposed to have the higher output. So let's say this is a YT, no, YT, and higher interest rate RT. But since central bank, they don't want to have this higher output. They want to go back to the original output. What they need to do, they implement contraction monetary policy, shift this LM curve to the left, then they can achieve the same amount of the output as before. But we're gonna have the higher interest rate R2. Okay? That's the three different scenario. But this one is a little bit weird because the government implement expansionary fiscal policy, probably they want to have the higher output or the low unemployment, but somehow central bank says, no, I don't want to have the higher output or I don't want to have the low unemployment. So they implement contraction monetary policy to go back to the original level of the output. That's a little bit weird, right? But it's just scenario that we studied how to interact between monetary policy and the fiscal policy. Now let's talk about the shocks. So the IS shock is basically the shocks that shift this IS curve. For example, stock market boom or crash, or the change in business or consumers' confidence or expectation. So then from there, you get to know basically that affects this equation, y equals MPC times the y minus t plus investment plus government spending. That captures the IS curve, right? So here, the first one, stock market boom or crash, that affects your income. So when there is a stock market boom, then you become rich. So household wealth goes up, then the people consume more, right? So that affects the IS curve. The second one, change in business or the consumer's confidence. So you have a bright future and you just decided to have a more investment because you have the bright future, right? So in the case investment goes up, this IS curve shift to the right. Okay? That's the IS shocks. Now the LM shocks, something happened to the money market. Exogenous changes in demand for money. Well, it's not by the central bank, it's by the, in the market. So that's why changes in the demand for money. The first one is that during COVID-19, consumers and companies did not wish to handle cash, then the money demand is decreased. So you can draw the money market graph. So we have a downward sloping money demand like this, and we have a vertical money supply, M over P. Now, when the money demand is decreased, then this demand curve shift to the downward or shift to the left. So let me call it L prime. Then what happened? Interest rate is decreased to the R2. Okay. And then the second one, more ATMs or the internet reduce money demand, same situation. Money demand is decreased and we're gonna have the lower interest rate. So that means the LM curve, we have to shift to the right. Why is that? Well, when you draw the IS-LM model, so we have a downward sloping IS and over sloping LM. In order to have lower interest rate, that's a situation that you need to shift this LM curve to the right. Otherwise, you're going to have the higher interest rate. So just suppose that you shift this LM curve to the left, then you're going to have the higher interest rate. So by having these two graphs, you get to know where you need to shift, right? So because that money demand is decreased, then as a result, we're going to have the lower interest rate. In order to capture that one, we have to shift this LM curve to the right. Okay? That is same as expansion monetary policy, because I told you expansion monetary policy shift this LM curve to the right. Okay, so this demand is decreased, and that's the same effect as an expansion monetary policy. All right, so here, let's cover this example. So use the ISM model to analyze the effects of the housing market crash that leads to consumers' wealth. Well, that affects the IS, right? So IS curve shift to the left because the consumers' wealth goes down, then people consume less. That affects the goods market equilibrium. So that means the IS curve shift to the left. On the other hand, the second one, consumers using cash in transactions more. So this is the opposite what we covered because the money demand is increased. That means okay, same thing. So let me copy and paste this graph, and we're gonna use the same graph. So let me copy and paste into here. So when the consumers using cash in transactions more, then they need to have a more cash, right? So this money demand is increased. Then what happened? Interest rate is increased from the R1 to R2. So that being said, the LM curve shift to the left. Okay. So take a look here. The first one. Housing market crashes, then IS curve shift to the left. As a result, interest rate goes down, output goes down. When output goes down, consume less, because the consumption is a function of the disposable income. Your income goes down, you consume less. On the other hand, the investment is a function of the real interest rate, and then real interest rate goes down, then investment goes up, because we have an inverse relationship between the interest rate and investment. And then the last one, unemployment rises because output becomes lower than before. Output goes down. That means that you have less workers. That means that you have a high unemployment. Okay. One more time. Output is decreased. What is it? Because you have less workers. So you have less workers. That means that you have less output, right? So less workers means that high unemployment. High unemployment. Now let's go to the next page. So second example, when the people wants to use more cashes than before, then what happened? The LM curve shifts to the left. So because the money demand is increased, then the interest rate is increased, right? So in the case, we have to shift this LM curve to the left. Then as a result, the interest rate goes up, output goes down. Since the output is decreased, consumption goes down. Again, the consumption is function of the disposable income. Your disposable income goes down, then consumption falls. And interest rate goes up, that's why the investment falls, and this is the same. Okay, now the next thing is, like I told you in the beginning, we want to derive this downward sloping aggregate demand curve by using the ISM model. So take a look. Now, what if the price is an increase? Okay, then what happened to the interest rate? Interest rate goes up. Why? So, well, you need to cover this money market graph again. So we have a downward sloping money demand, and we have a vertical money supply. Okay. When the price is increased, what happened? This one, the vertical money supply, real money supply, is a decrease. So we need to shift this one to the left. Okay, so P is an increase. Okay, then what happened? As a result, we have a higher interest rate R2. In order to capture this one, we have to shift this LM curve to the left. As a result, we have a higher interest rate, R2, okay? Then as a result, what happened to the output? Output is decreased. So we just found the inverse relationship between the price and output. But we found this relationship by having the ISM model, okay? The same downward sloping aggregate demand curve, but we can talk about the different market, the goods market equilibrium, and the money market equilibrium, and we can also talk about this interest rate. Okay? That's the benefit of having this ISM model. So we can talk about the short-run transition, from the short-run to the long-run transition. Okay. Now, given this, what if central bank implement expansion monetary policy? So the LM curve shift to the right. As a result, the interest rate goes down and output goes up. In order to capture this one with this AD curve, so we have to shift this AD curve to the right. Then I have a question. What if the government implement expansionary fiscal policy? Well, in the case, IS curve shift to the right and this AD curve shift to the right. So then what's the difference? Well, when you shift this LM curve to the right, you see that interest rate goes down, output goes up. On the other hand, so let me write down here, expansionary monetary policy, lower the interest rate, output is increased. On the other hand, expansionary fiscal policy, such as lowering the tax or the raising government spending, so then we have the IS curve, we shift to the right, and as a result, what happened? Output is increased, but at the same time, the interest rate is increased. So it's totally opposite in terms of the interest rate, okay? Expansion monetary policy, lower the interest rate. That's a channel of the expansion monetary policy. By lowering the interest rate, we have the higher investment. That's why AD curve shift to the right. On the other hand, expansion fiscal policy, in the end, the result is interest rate is increased due to this expansion fiscal policy. That's a different effect. Okay. All right, now we have one last thing. So we're going to study about the transition from the short run to the long run equilibrium. So let me draw the graph the step by step. So I'm going to show you the recessionary gap. Okay. So the first graph, I draw the IS model. So here, downward sloping IS and the upward sloping LM. In order to capture the recessionary gap, so this is a long run aggregate supply curve, and here's a Y bar, long run level of the output, but current output is a Y1. Now, the bottom, let me draw the ADS model. So the Y-axis is the price level, X-axis is the output. And here we have long run aggregate supply curve, long run aggregate supply curve, and we have a downward sloping aggregate demand curve. And we have a horizontal short run aggregate supply curve. And it's matched with the ISL model. So here is the same Y1. Okay, so this is a Y1, this is a Y bar. Now, because the current level of the output, the short run equilibrium output is less than the long run level of the output, that's why we call it the recessionary gap. Then what happened? Over time, this short run aggregate supply curve shift to the downward, SRAS2, and the price is decreased from the P1 to P2. Why is that? Well, when Y1 is less than Y bar, that means that you are producing less than before. That means that unemployment rate is high. Unemployment is high. Then unemployed workers, they are willing to take any jobs because they want to survive. Then, well, the companies, they can lower the wages. So now the companies, they have a market power and they can lower the wages, then the cost of the production is decreased. Why? Because the wage is decreased. Okay. Then over time, you can lower the price of your final product. So the price of output over time is decreased. That's why over time, the short run aggregate supply curve shift to the downward. So this is a short run equilibrium point A, but over time, we're gonna have we're gonna achieve the long run equilibrium point B. Then if the price is decreased, and then what happened? Well, this LM curve shift to the right like this. Okay. Then as a result, we have a lower interest rate R2. So what's the point of these models, ISM model and the ADS model? Well, before we have this ISM model, we cannot talk about the details about the interest rate. Okay. But now you can see that when we have a recessionary gap, we know that this short run aggregate supply curve shifted to the downward, and we have a lower price level P2, and the output goes back to the long run level of the output. But at the same time, since the price is decreased, we know that this LM curve shift to the right, so that's why we're gonna have a lower interest rate R2. Okay, that's it.